Step aside, Trent. We're the cloud generation, you're the clipboard era.
If you think my time is over, then you better pay attention to what happens next.
Good luck.
At the moment, the elevator doors slid open. I knew something was wrong. Not the usual Monday chaos, not the clutter of shipments or the hum of printers. This was quieter. Too quiet. And then I saw them, 2 employees from accounting carrying cardboard boxes labeled Supply Chain Team, Dispose, my team, my department, my life's work reduced to trash stickers in the middle of the glass lobby. I tightened my grip on the old clipboard in my hand, the one I'd carried through 28 years of late-night audits and cross-country inspections. The plastic was worn smooth where my thumb rested. A small comfort as the 2 employees avoided my eyes and hurried past like I was contagious. No congratulations for the contract I'd secured last week. No welcome back. Just silence and sidelong glances. As I walked the long glass hallway toward my floor, the air felt heavier with every step. Doors that used to swing open for me stayed shut. People who used to wave suddenly studied their screens with monk-level concentration. Something had shifted while I was gone, and whatever it was, it clearly wasn't in my favor. When I reached my department, I pushed open the door, still telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. There wasn't. Standing right on top of my old workstation was Weston Hale, my new department head of 6 months, beaming like he had just discovered fire. And beside him, arranging framed certificates across my desk as if claiming territory, was Parker Vale. The so-called prodigy Weston had raved about for weeks. The room went silent when I stepped in. "Trent," Weston said, smiling as if delivering good news. "You should head down to the basement. Your space up here doesn't align with our new strategy anymore." A couple of people looked away. One bit her lip, another pretended to cough, but most of them just stared, waiting to see how the old man with the clipboard would take the hit. I opened my mouth, but Parker moved first. He smoothed his tie, stepped close enough for me to smell the new hire cologne still clinging to his shirt, and murmured loud enough for the room to hear, "I'll try not to make too much of a mess, cleaning up what you left behind." The chuckle soft, nervous, but real, stabbed deeper than anything else. And just like that, I knew the rules had changed. And if you've ever walked into a moment like that where the room goes quiet the second you arrive, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Your comments and your support keep this series alive. So feel free to subscribe if you want more stories just like this one. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairwell, the air had changed. It felt colder, heavier, almost like the building itself wanted me gone. A single flickering bulb hummed above the basement doorway, throwing long shadows across the concrete floor. When I pushed it open, the smell hit first damp walls, old wiring, and the metallic tang of something leaking where it shouldn't. A slow drip from the overhead air unit landed on our printer, each drop echoing louder than the last. Liv, the youngest on my team, was setting a framed photo of her family beside a trembling folding table that barely held her laptop. She tried to smile when she saw me, but it slipped before it formed. The others stood scattered around the room, pretending to settle in, pretending this was temporary, pretending this wasn't a punishment delivered without warning. I set my old clipboard on the nearest table, and the sharp clack cut through the room like a reprimand. Everyone froze for a moment, eyes lifting toward me as if waiting for answers I didn't yet have. I breathed in, slow and steady, because someone had to stay calm, even if I felt myself burning under the weight of what had been done to us. "We're going to make this work," I told them, forcing a steadiness I didn't feel. But behind the words, shame gnawed at me. Shame that after decades of solving impossible problems, I couldn't stop this one. Still, they needed direction, and I wasn't about to let the basement steal the discipline that made us who we were. I gathered them close and lowered my voice, making sure the hum of the pipes masked every word. "Starting today," I said, "we document everything, process guides, workflow maps, dependencies, every detail." They looked confused, nearly offended, but I didn't give them time to argue. "This isn't surrender," I added softly. "It's preparation, quiet preparation." And even though none of them knew what I truly meant, they nodded, trusting me the way they always had while the basement swallowed us whole. I could feel the cold settling into my jacket as I walked the perimeter of the room, taking in every sagging cable and mismatched chair left for us like scraps. Nothing about this space invited work. It barely invited breathing. Yet as I looked at their faces, Liv's trembling confusion, Marco's clenched jaw, Tessa's forced composure. I knew the real damage wasn't the basement itself. It was the message we were expendable, so I stood there, letting the weight of it settle before speaking again. "Listen," I said, my voice steadier than my pulse. "What they did up there has nothing to do with your worth. Remember that." The room stayed silent, but something shifted, a quiet resolve, thin but unmistakable. Maybe it was the way Liv straightened her shoulders or how Marco finally met my eyes, whatever it was. I felt the first spark of a plan catching fire today. By the third day in the basement, the silence had begun to feel like another layer of insulation, thick, stale, and impossible to shake. The network connection down there was so weak that even opening an email took the patience of a saint. We eventually stopped trying and started passing files around on USB drives like it was 1998, every time a flash drive clicked into place. It felt like a reminder of how far we'd been pushed from the world upstairs. No one complained, though. My team moved quietly, mechanically, as if sound itself might draw more punishment. Their restraint cut deeper than any insult. Late that afternoon, I realized I'd left a set of compliance documents in my old office. I didn't want to risk asking Weston's new assistant, so I slipped upstairs while the others worked. The hallway felt unnaturally bright compared to the basement, almost surgical. I kept my head down and walked quickly, hoping to go unnoticed. But as I reached the corner near our former department, I heard voices, familiar voices. I stopped. Parker was laughing, that sharp, eager laugh he used whenever he pretended confidence. "He's still carrying that clipboard," he said. "Can you believe it? We're the cloud generation. He's the clipboard era." The words were playful, casual, almost harmless, yet they landed with the precision of a blade. I had been called outdated, old school, even stubborn before. But something about hearing it now, after everything that had happened, stripped away another quiet layer inside me. I stepped closer, staying behind the glass partition. Weston stood beside Parker, arms crossed, nodding with the satisfied smirk of someone who believed he'd successfully replaced the past with something shinier. Then Weston put a hand on Parker's shoulder, firm, approving. They exchanged a smile that looked unsettlingly like celebration. The moment froze me. I felt the cold from the glass seep through my sleeve, anchoring me in place. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic revelation, only a silence so complete it felt physical. I watched them talk, gesture, laugh, completely unaware of the man standing inches away on the other side of the divide. That divide felt wider than the entire building. I didn't move until their voices faded into another room. Then I turned back toward the stairwell, each step echoing with a dull, hollow weight. I returned to the basement carrying the same clipboard Parker mocked, but now it felt heavier, not because of age or paperwork, but because I finally understood something. The cut hadn't been loud or obvious. It had been invisible, delivered in whispers and smirks, and it had been happening long before the basement. And as I set the clipboard back on the wobbling table downstairs, I realized the basement hadn't created the silence around me. It had only exposed what had been growing quietly in the walls for months now. The message from the CEO arrived just after sunrise, a short, clipped request for me to present our division's results at the upcoming board meeting. For a moment, the weight pressing on my chest lifted. After weeks of working in that freezing basement, after the humiliation, after the whispers and the USB handoffs, this small acknowledgement felt like the first warm light cutting through a storm. I spent nearly the entire night refining my slide deck, choosing every metric carefully, preparing answers to questions only people who'd lived the supply chain trenches would even know to ask. By morning, I was exhausted but steady. This presentation wasn't just about numbers. It was about proving my team still mattered. When I arrived outside the 11th floor conference suite, the hallway was oddly quiet, as if the building was holding its breath. I adjusted my tie, breathed once, and reached for the door only for it to swing open abruptly. Weston stepped out, blocking the entrance with the casual confidence of someone who believed he owned the floor under his feet. "Trent," he said, smiling too widely. "Don't bother." I frowned. "The board asked for me." His smile sharpened. "The board doesn't need to dwell on the past today. Parker will present the department's future. It makes more sense strategically." He shrugged, as if he were doing me a favor. "You can head back downstairs." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. The air in the hallway felt thin, brittle. Every late hour I'd spent preparing, Every year I'd fought for this department, every insult swallowed since the basement, all of it pressed behind my ribs with nowhere to go. But I didn't argue, didn't lash out, didn't give Weston the show he wanted. I simply nodded once and walked away. By the time I reached the basement, my hands were trembling with a slow, simmering fury I kept buried under the surface. I set my slide deck on the nearest table, and the old fan in the corner blew the papers apart in a soft, mocking flutter. Liv looked up, confused, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. Not yet. I gathered the pages with quiet, deliberate movements, each one feeling like another reminder that no matter how hard we worked, someone upstairs could erase us with a single sentence. 30 minutes later, the first message arrived from a friend in finance who had slipped into the back of the board meeting. He's drowning. The message read, they asked him about cost-to-serve ratios. He didn't even know what the term meant. Another message followed, then another. Parker had walked into that room with Weston's confidence behind him and crumbled the moment real scrutiny hit. He stumbled through forecasting, contradicted himself on sourcing strategy, gave an answer so wildly inaccurate the CFO asked if he'd misunderstood the question. I sat there in the cold basement, listening to the drip of the air unit on the printer, feeling a strange, controlled satisfaction settle in. The spotlight they stole from me was finally burning them instead, when Weston appeared in the basement doorway that afternoon. He carried himself as if he were descending from a higher altitude than the rest of us. Despite the fact that the ceiling pipes were barely a foot above his head, he flashed a smile wide, polished, rehearsed, and announced that leadership was reconsidering workspace allocations and looking into potential options upstairs. The words drifted through the cold air like warm air vents we no longer had. My team straightened, their expressions flickering with the kind of hope people don't want to admit they still feel after being shoved into a basement. Weston nodded at me like we were partners, not casualties of his ambition. I felt every pair of eyes slide toward me, searching for confirmation that this wasn't another false start. Their shoulders, always tight from working in cramped corners, lifted with a cautious breath. Liv even reached for the family photo she kept on her table, as if imagining it sitting somewhere with actual sunlight. I wanted to give them certainty. I wanted to mirror their hope. But something in Weston's easy tone tightened the space around us. Upside-down promises tended to come wrapped in friendliness when delivered by people who'd already decided you were disposable. Still, my team waited for me to say something they could hold on to, so I stayed quiet, letting the hum of the leaking air unit swallow the moment instead. My hand tightened around my old clipboard until my knuckles went pale, the familiar edge digging into my palm like a reminder not to trust too quickly. Hope is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands, and Weston knew exactly how to package it, just enough optimism to soften resistance, not enough substance to mean anything. My silence confused my team. They expected reassurance, a roadmap, some signal that this shift upstairs would undo everything the basement had carved into us, but I couldn't give them a promise built on someone else's opportunism. As the day wound down, their hopeful energy settled into an uneasy mixture of anticipation and doubt. They whispered about what it might feel like to have windows again, to sit in chairs that didn't wobble, to work somewhere that didn't smell like mildew and resignation. I watched them from across the room, admiring their resilience while fearing how easily hope could turn back into hurt. No one said it out loud, but they were waiting for me to validate this possibility. Instead, I told them we would continue documenting every process, every workflow, every dependency, quiet preparation for a future that might not arrive through Weston at all. That night, after the others had gone home, I remained in the basement with only the drip of the air unit for company. The silence felt heavier than usual, pressing against my ribs as if urging me to move. So I did. I stepped into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't used in 10 years, Evelyn Rourke, my mentor. I timed Evelyn's visit down to the minute. She arrived through the south entrance with the same calm authority she'd carried a decade ago, her heels echoing across the polished lobby like someone who never wasted steps. I kept a quiet distance behind her until we turned the corner toward the executive demo area where Weston stood proudly beside Parker, entertaining a trio of potential clients. Weston spotted Evelyn and straightened so quickly you'd think a board seat had just walked in. Parker launched into his pitch without missing a beat, eager to impress anyone with a pulse. He gestured toward a projected flowchart filled with dramatic arrows and inflated metrics. During my tenure, he bragged, I increased output by 300% at Northline Freight alone. My methods reshape entire infrastructures. It's not just innovation, it's reinvention. His voice carried the air of someone convinced he was delivering a masterclass that no one else in the room could possibly understand. I watched Evelyn's expression as she took in his claims. Her face stayed perfectly composed, almost serene. But I knew that stillness. It was the same look she had worn the day she dismantled a false forecast in front of 14 executives without raising her voice. She waited patiently for Parker to finish, letting his self-praise stack higher and higher like boxes in an unstable warehouse when he finally stopped talking, smiling proudly at his imaginary empire. Evelyn stepped forward. "That's fascinating," she said lightly, "especially since I sit on Northline Freight's board." The room froze. Even the projector seemed to hum more quietly. Then she added, voice still soft, "And we never recorded anything close to a 300% increase during your time there." The silence that followed sliced through the air like cold steel. Parker blinked, mouth opening then closing again, as if searching for a reboot button that didn't exist. Weston's polished confidence cracked instantly. He looked from Evelyn to Parker and back again, the color draining from his face. The clients shifted uncomfortably, their expressions turning from impressed curiosity to sharp suspicion. I should have felt triumphant, but the moment hit harder than I expected. There was satisfaction. Yes, sweet, sharp, undeniable, but beneath it ran a cold shock that left my chest tight. For weeks I'd watched Parker parade around with unearned confidence, watched Weston treat him like a savior while burying my team beneath the building. Seeing the truth drop like that clean. Irrefutable felt like someone had finally opened a window in a room I'd been suffocating in. Evelyn didn't stop there. She turned fully toward me, her voice carrying across the room with effortless authority. "Trent," she said, "I want you to bring your entire team to my division." She didn't pause, effective immediately. Gasps rippled around us. Weston took a step forward, stunned, but Evelyn didn't acknowledge him. She kept her eyes on me, offering something I hadn't felt in far too long, recognition that wasn't transactional, respect that wasn't borrowed, and an escape that didn't come wrapped in compromise. And for one breathless moment, all I felt was the shock of suddenly being seen again. I arrived outside Marion Cross's office with the kind of tension that makes every step feel heavier than it should. The hallway was silent, not the usual corporate quiet, but the thick, padded kind that follows bad news. Her assistant waved me in without a word, and the door closed behind me with a soft click that felt almost deliberate. Marion sat at her desk, hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable, no anger, no warmth, just calculation settling behind her eyes like slow-moving clouds. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat carefully, sensing the weight of the moment before either of us spoke. Finally. She opened a thick folder on her desk and slid it toward me. Inside was a proposal that didn't match anything I expected: expanded authority, a dedicated budget, direct reporting to her, and a compensation package that eclipsed anything I had seen in my 28 years in the industry. It was the kind of offer executives use to make legends out of. But here it was, sitting between us under fluorescent light. I looked up, struggling to keep my voice steady. Why now? Marion didn't flinch. Because now I need you. The simplicity of her answer felt like a cord pulled too tight. She leaned back slightly, watching me absorb the implications. Her tone wasn't flattering or apologetic. It was strategic, almost surgical. She needed stability after Parker's exposure, after Weston's overreach, after the board's growing frustration, and I had become the only person who could provide it. As I reread the offer, the tension in the room stretched thinner. On the surface, it was everything I had ever wanted for my team: autonomy, recognition, the chance to rebuild what Weston had dismantled. But beneath that sat a truth that chilled me. Marion wasn't just offering an opportunity. She was positioning me, loading me into place like a piece on a chessboard. The realization hit hard. She wanted me to stay not because she valued my past work, but because I was the sharpest weapon available in the fight she now needed to win. Weston had embarrassed her. The board had lost faith. Parker's lies had polluted the executive floor. And now she needed someone credible, someone untainted, someone whose integrity she could leverage as a counterstrike. I closed the folder gently. Marion watched every movement, measuring my reactions the way a strategist measures distances before launching an offensive. In that quiet room, I understood the truth. I wasn't being rescued. I was being recruited. Accepting her offer would change everything for my team. But it would also tie me to a conflict I never asked for, forcing me to choose whether loyalty or survival mattered more in the shifting hierarchy above me. By the time I gathered everyone for what I knew would be our final meeting in the basement, the air felt even heavier than usual, as if the leaking pipes themselves understood what was coming. Liv was the last to sit down, her eyes already red, the framed photo of her family clutched to her chest like a question she didn't know how to ask. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "I don't want us to split up," she whispered. "I don't want this team to end." Her words cut deeper than anything Weston had done. I felt something twist inside me, a tight pull between what I wished I could promise and what I knew I couldn't avoid. I wanted to tell them we would stay together, that one offer or the other would carry all of us to the same place. But every path I examined led to the same conclusion. Keeping the team intact meant leaving them vulnerable again. I took a breath, steadying my voice before the truth slipped out too raw. "This isn't a breakup," I said quietly. "It's an expansion. We're growing in two directions at once." The room stayed silent as they absorbed it, the meaning settling over them like dust. Marco leaned back, rubbing his forehead as if trying to map the new structure in his mind. Tessa tapped her pen against her notebook, her eyes darting between the others. Even Daryl, usually stoic to the point of stone, shifted uncomfortably. "So some of us go with Evelyn," he said slowly, "and some stay here under Marion." I nodded. Both groups get support, resources, and protection. No more basements, no more blindsides. The promise tasted both necessary and unbearably heavy. Liv wiped her cheeks, trying to be brave. "But what about you?" she asked. The question hung in the air, more fragile than anything else in the room. For a moment I considered lying, offering a comforting direction that would anchor them. But the truth pressed harder. "I'm not choosing one side," I said finally. "I'm going to work between them." Confusion flickered across their faces. I continued. "If both companies depend on us, if both need our expertise, then neither can afford to undermine us again." It wasn't just strategy, it was protection disguised as neutrality. They didn't cheer, didn't celebrate, but something settled among them, a quiet understanding that this wasn't abandonment, it was insurance. Marco exhaled slowly, like the tension in his shoulders had been stored there for years. Liv moved closer, gripping my arm in a way that said she understood, even if it hurt. "Then we follow your lead," she whispered. Their trust pressed against me harder than any pressure, as we mapped who would go where. The basement felt less like punishment and more like the launching point of something none of us imagined before now. The boardroom lights were dimmer than usual, giving the entire space a dusk-like heaviness, as if the building itself knew a reckoning was coming. Weston stood at the front, pacing confidently in front of a screen flooded with neon arrows, exaggerated projections, and the kind of buzzwords executives use when they don't understand their own material. "Transformative synergy," he announced, tapping a chart shaped more like a firework than a forecast. "Radical reinvention. Productivity beyond traditional physics." The board members exchanged confused glances, but Weston continued undeterred, building his fantasy higher with every slide. I listened without interrupting, though each false claim tightened something in my chest. My team, half upstairs now, half onboarding with Evelyn, had spent years building real results, tangible improvements, not the cotton candy Weston was serving. I waited until he finished with a flourish and stepped aside triumphantly. That was my moment. I stood up slowly, the old clipboard in my hand feeling heavier than ever. When I reached the table's edge, I placed it down with a sharp, deliberate thud. The sound cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Conversations died instantly. Even the projector seemed to hum more quietly. "I'd like to offer some context," I said. "No theatrics, no buzzwords, just truth." I opened the clipboard, revealing pages filled with notes written by my own hand ink, smudged by time. Margin calculations, field sketches from warehouse floors, timestamps from midnight truck reroutes. "These," I began, "are 5 years of supply chain data, actual performance reports, process maps, cost-to-serve analyses, every number verified, every trend tracked, every exception explained." I pointed to the chart Weston had presented moments earlier. "None of what was shown just now aligns with our real operations, not even remotely." A board member leaned forward. "Can you walk us through the discrepancies?" I did, line by line, Exception by exception, I showed how Weston's projections ignored constraints, created fictional capacities, and violated the laws of lead time. Then I outlined the risks, financial, operational, legal, that would inevitably follow if the company adopted his model. My voice stayed calm, but inside, something fierce unfurled, decades of discipline finally meeting the moment it was built for. When I finished, the room was silent, not confused, not skeptical, just stunned. Marion turned toward Weston, her expression unreadable, her voice controlled. "I have one final question," she said. "Your own data shows Trent's team delivered 78% of last year's successful output, so tell me, why were they working in the basement?" The words struck harder than any slam of a boardroom gavel. Weston's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, not an excuse, not an apology. Only a hollow intake of air. The board members exchanged looks that sealed the outcome faster than any formal vote, and in that suspended moment, I felt something finally release inside me. Justice not loud, not vindictive, just clean. Exactly what the basement had always deserved. The Monday morning I stepped into my new office felt almost unreal. Sunlight spilled across the floor in long, bright lines, warming the air in a way the basement never could. The quiet wasn't heavy or punishing anymore, just peaceful. No leaking pipes, no flickering bulbs, no folding tables threatening to collapse under the weight of real work. The chair behind my desk was wide and soft, the kind of seat meant for someone whose voice finally mattered. A nameplate waited for me, Trent Lawson, Chief Supply Chain Strategy Officer. Underneath it was a second card, Special Advisor, Rourke Global Logistics. Seeing my title printed twice, in two worlds that finally recognized my worth, made something inside me settle after months of turbulence. The dual team system took shape faster than anyone predicted. Half my people worked inside Atlas Sync, rebuilding processes from the inside, while the other half joined Evelyn's division to create new networks and rapid response operations. For the first time in the industry, two competitors openly collaborated, sharing intel, forecasting demand together, synchronizing capacity. Reporters called it a cross-corporate supply chain alliance. To us, it was simply dignity restored. Our ideas no longer had to fight for oxygen. They had room to breathe, to grow, to influence decisions on both sides of the market every time we held a joint meeting. My two teams greeted each other with the easy familiarity of people who had survived the same storm and learned to navigate the aftermath. There was pride in the way they carried themselves, now unforced, earned, grounded. Nobody mentioned the basement anymore. But I saw how it shaped them. It had taught us all how quickly value could be ignored and how powerful it could be when reclaimed. At the end of my first week, Evelyn stopped by my new office. She pointed at the empty space on the wall and said, "If you're ever going to hang something meaningful, put it there." After she left, I opened my briefcase and removed the old clipboard, the one I'd held through warehouse inspections, late-night crises, and the humiliations I no longer carried. The plastic was still worn where my thumb had rested for nearly 3 decades. I placed it into a simple black frame and mounted it on the wall. It didn't look like a relic. It looked like proof. Later, I heard a rumor from someone who'd left Atlas Sync for a smaller firm where Weston was now working as a warehouse supervisor. They said that every time he walked past a clipboard hanging near the loading dock, his face went pale, like some ghost of his past had reached out and tapped him on the shoulder. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I understood why it lingered with him. In the end, I learned that respect isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, piece by piece, even in the darkest corners of a basement. And if my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Your likes, comments, shares, and subscriptions help us keep creating stories that remind people they're not alone in their battles.